Welcome to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Director of the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business-owning families. This conversation today represents progress in our achievement of that objective. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business-owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship of the James E. Hughes Jr. Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being, and we at the Drucker School feel very aligned and very grateful for Jay and his foundation. On the last Authors at Drucker, we featured Bernie Jaworski, author of The Organic Growth Playbook. Bernie is the Peter Drucker Chair at the Drucker School of Management, and if you missed it, that interview is on our YouTube channel for your replay. Today, I'm joined by Sara Hamilton and Margaret Vaughan Cox. Sara is the founder of Family Office Exchange, an industry-leading membership organization that brings families, family office executives, and advisors together. Sara, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
And Margaret Vaughan Cox is a top practitioner in family enterprise consulting and holds over 25 years of experience in the field. She assures me that she began at age 10. Margaret, welcome to Authors at Drucker.
Thanks, Dave. So good to be here.
Well, Sara, perhaps we can begin with you. You guys have written an incredible book, maybe a book that's more colorful than most family business or family office books. So I appreciate that. But I'm curious about what led to the writing of the book and maybe how the content is organized as a series of journeys. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. We focus our thinking for this book around the evolution of families and the recognition that families are forever on a journey of some sort. When I started thinking about taking what I had learned over the last 35 years and organizing it in some form that would be really valuable to families, I had 2 or 3 key concepts in mind. That it had to be short enough that people would read it. There had to be narrative descriptions and visual descriptions of any concept that I wanted to share. And it had to be organized to be a discussion starter in the family's meeting center, and not just something for a single individual to read. So I inventoried about 175 things that in my work with families get people stuck. And I knew that I couldn't have something that would get that detailed. So we narrowed it down to 45 core concepts that families need to talk about together. They're organized around 3 journeys: the personal journey of the individual, the family journey, and the enterprise journey itself. And I want to spend just a minute on the definition of what we call the enterprise family. This is a family that works together, stays together, and believes in being together on multiple dimensions of their lives together. So it's a business-centric family that evolves to become an enterprise family. There are properties involved, businesses involved, different geographies, different types of activities, fantastic travel if we're lucky, and the making opportunities to enjoy each other. That is an enterprise family. So our comments are not centered around the business, a single business, and what's best for that business. It's centered around the collective assets that the family owns together.
Well, I was just going to interject. I'm so grateful that you've done this because, maybe it is the individual journey that gets less shine in the family business space, or maybe it is even the family journey on its own that gets less attention, and the business seems to get a lot of the attention.
Yeah.
And if, as you know, if we don't take care of ourselves independently, find our own goals, our own ambitions, or if we don't tend to and invest in our family relationships, none of the things that we do on the business side really matter if the
Yeah.
family's going to be broken or the individuals aren't served. So I
Yeah.
really think it's a nice balance that you've struck.
In the book, we have a enterprise checklist that's organized around 4 domains. It's on page 112 if you have one of the books. Um, the family unity dimension, the business performance side, the financial security part, and the philanthropic impact the family is hoping to have. And one of the fascinating things in using that tool with our workshop participants and families we've done work with, I was anticipating there would be maybe 2 or 3 check marks in each column. And what we find is that families have a lot of check marks in 2 of the 4 domains. And they typically have no work that's begun in the other 2, or very little work that's focused on the other 2 dimensions of it. And we'll talk later about family engagement, and this is such a great way to demonstrate to the family there are multiple ways in which you can contribute in our family setting. I'll mention that these 48 milestones that are in the book are each organized in 2 or 3 pages. And the book has a QR code where you can go to our website and get a copy of any one milestone and pull it down and print it out so you can take it into a family meeting and have a discussion about that topic. And we'll be talking about some of the different milestones that are listed in the book next. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, the fact that you've done that makes it so helpful because so many families are overwhelmed by the magnitude of the process. And when you can pull it apart and pick 1 or 2 things in a family meeting to tackle, and knowing that you're not taking on too much, but that it's meaningful, I think is really important. And so, yeah, I'm especially appreciative for the way that you can kind of pull it apart and not be overwhelmed by the magnitude of all the things that a family and a business and an individual needs to do to, chart the course. So I appreciate it. Um, Margaret, my next question is for you. You begin with the family journey, talking about family history and patterns, values, and guiding principles. Why is it so important to look at the past before planning for the future?
Right. Well, yeah, that can sometimes feel counterintuitive, particularly for owners who are, really focused on the future and ready to go and get to work planning for the future. But as Shakespeare famously said, our past is prologue to our future. So we do recommend starting this process with the family with what we call a history mapping process. And it is fundamentally a storytelling process for the family. We, as you can tell from the book, and you've already referenced, we're big believers in visual thinking because there are so many of us in the world are visual thinkers. And so we work with an artist when working with families. But you can do this on your own too. It's not necessary to have a graphic facilitator, but it adds a wonderful dimension. And we facilitate the family through telling their story. This is the whole story of the family's enterprise, all different domains of that enterprise, going back really to whatever point of origin the family feels is most relevant for them. And that could be when their forebears were born, but it's whenever they feel like the roots of their values and their guiding principles and sort of their DNA are begin. And we have a visual timeline that comes all the way to the current day. And we ask the family to write up on that map all of the events and defining moments that, again, are relevant for them. And this is not just the story for the public. A lot of the families we work with have done that. This is the whole story. So it's not just the successes and celebrations, it's the failures and the setbacks and the things that don't often get talked about. And so it's important to tell that whole story, particularly for younger members who might, think, wow, all of this success, just happened. And, how could I possibly be up to that? And in telling the story together as a family, and we do sit down and there's an oral storytelling dimension to this, it's really important and powerful. The family is able to identify the patterns, very era specific. Others have played out over the whole course of their history. The values, of course, that the family has been in service of, and it's evident through the storytelling. And then those more unconscious, deep-seated guiding principles that do dictate, they drive behavior, they drive outcomes. We record those along the bottom of this history map. And then the end of that session, help the family make decisions about which of those patterns and values and guiding principles they very intentionally want to carry forward into their future. And also, very importantly, which ones do they want to leave behind? Because they determine that those patterns, values, principles no longer serve them, and perhaps they never did. And that really can that unleashes important conversations. And I'll just say this finally, there's something, a lot of families, there'll be trepidation about talking about the past if there have been some unpleasant experiences or failures you'd like to avoid discussing, et cetera. But when discussing it within the context, the broader context of what was going on at that time in the family and in the external environment with the knowledge that was available at the time, it somehow it humanizes it for people. And we've seen real shifts in attitude and, the dropping of judgment or assumptions about decisions that were made in the past. And it can really make a huge difference for a family as they then turn to discussing how they want to move forward together.
Well, I'll make
really
two
fun
observations. Yeah, that's a big project too. Two observations I'll make. One is, many times families tell only part of the story. They tell the story of the founding line, and I think that's a big miss as well. And so as those that are listening on this call today, I would just encourage you to think about telling both sides of the family story. Oftentimes, if we do this exercise only on one side, it feels alienating and it feels like, one side is important because this side created the financial capital and the other side came along for the ride. So be aware of that. The other thing that I've found to be powerful, Margaret, specifically, is if the rising generation can be a part of telling the story. So one of the things we've done in the past is we do some of this pre-work with the rising gen to do interviews with their parents and specifically with their grandparents. And it is a beautiful thing for them to just tell parts or pieces of the story and ask them the question, where do you see yourself in this journey? Or what traits do you see that your grandpa had that maybe you inherited? And it's a magical thing. So I just wanted to add that as kind of color to this.
Well, and let me just say that we are very specific about saying this history is about all of you. To your point, it's about everybody in this room and those that preceded you. But we encourage people to write events and defining moments in their own personal stories. And that includes in-laws and everybody that's in that room. And we've done this with, founding families of 4 or 5 people to, 6th-generation families of 80 people. So it's a very rich, wonderful process.
Beautiful. I love it. Sara, back to you. Milestone 10 of the family journey specifically discusses the necessity of a family developing a continuous learning culture. What are some of the keys to making that happen, if it isn't already a part of the family culture, that learning and growing culture together?
Yeah. I think the word together there is the operative word.
Mm.
We are raising a younger generation of naturally curious, internet-oriented young people who are obsessed with understanding the big picture about what's going on in the world and what's going on in their enterprise family. And I think the key to a continuous learning culture is that in every generation we are demonstrating this. It's the way we ask the questions in a meeting setting, to in how we have our discussions, that sets the right tone for continuing to ask questions and be curious and demonstrate an exploration mindset. The family's willingness to evolve and deal with change is going to be so critical in this next decade, as the pace is moving at such a fast pace, and the nature of the disruptions are so much less predictable than they've been in the past, that learning together a framework for asking questions and exploring new opportunities and where the risks are is going to become a critical part of that. We have found that families who take time to learn how to have these discussions as a group before they dive in and start problem solving together are much more productive than families who haven't been coached on what creates a curiosity mindset in the family.
Well, the word that you use that I think is really key to these generational learnings is curiosity. And it has to be young people crossing the bridge to talk to the older, and the older people also crossing the bridge back to the younger to say, what could we do to entice people of your generation to love our products or to interact with our products? And if there's that level of curiosity across generations, like, it gives us an incredible competitive advantage. And
Yes.
we tap into people in our family system that may not know how to participate, but our
Yes.
curiosity and our questions might open a door for them and open a door for that
Yeah.
participation.
And there are certain types of family members who are the observers, who are good at the exploration and at raising what the question is, that are not always, they're not the action-oriented problem-solving type people, but they are the individuals who can really probe with the right question at the right time. And this is the type of individual you look for in the business and in the family office also. It makes a huge difference when the question gets raised, when the time is right for that.
Yeah, and for us to clarify that we need you all. We need the movers. We need the impatient. We also need the observers. We need the slower to act, those that, are more
Challengers.
measured in their approach. Challengers, exactly.
Yeah.
But inviting all, and the fact that we could celebrate all and somehow magically come up with something better because everyone had a voice. Now, maybe not everyone gets a vote on how how the
Right.
dollars get allocated or whatever like that. But
Yeah.
I think encouraging the voice is something that's really powerful in terms of fostering inclusion.
Yeah, it's a cultural element in the development of the family to be able to do that. Yeah, respect those different generations.
So perhaps we should move to the enterprise journey. On page 62, you include an incredible visual of a long and winding roadmap filled with bridges, obstacles, and protocols needed to navigate these generational integrations and transitions. What are some of the most commonly overlooked items along the road to enterprise continuity? Sarah, this one's for you still.
Yeah. I think the first thing to think of is the fact that there are generational bridges on the pathway. It's a giant pathway that winds around, and every third of it, or if you're in the sixth generation, there's five bridges that you've crossed as a family group. And to build your own roadmap about when did we expand our thinking to include the family foundation and the philanthropic impact we want to have. When did we find it necessary to formalize our governance? At what point did the family council tackle the question, how much togetherness is the right amount of togetherness in our family? All of these, and in the last 20 years, we've had the very tricky question, what are the roles for spouses and step families that have become a part of our family, and how does that evolve over time and through the generations? Constructing the enterprise house itself and naming it as an enterprise, and we use a visual house with a roof and rooms in the house to define the key core elements of the family's enterprise. And every room in the house has an overarching goal identified for that room in the house. And that picture of a house can be understood by every 18-year-old in the family. If you speak of it as something that we build together, and we alter what's in the rooms in the house when it's time to make these alterations, and that establishes this change culture that we want our young people to acknowledge, and we want it to bleed into their very essence about who we are as a family. But knowing what's in the house is critical, and what those guiding principles and shared values are in the roof of the house is key. And when you develop formalized governance, and which aspects of formalized governance we put those on our journey map. And we have a big 8-foot blow up of this journey map that we hang at the Fox meeting, so people will come and look at it and talk about it with each other. And we had a member ask us to give them a map that has nothing on it but the pathway and the bridges, and let them fill in, their own timing, their own picture of where they've been. So we are still working on that one.
I think the beautiful thing about that is that each family get to choose. They get to choose their journey, they get to choose their timing. And
Yeah.
as an advisor to those families, we can share with them what other families have done, the timing of when they've done it. But ultimately, these plans come together by choice.
Yeah.
And there's also, there are implications by not making choices. And we just need to allow the families to know that maybe by not crossing this bridge, there could be some challenges as well.
Yes. I think it's important to know that there is no recipe book for what belongs at what stage in the family's journey. It is different for every family. Some need to formalize their governance structure between the third and fourth generation, and some families begin that process in the first generation, in the way in which they begin to bring their children into the mix. And it is a function of the people in the family and what DNA you have, what priorities you've made, and what your guiding principles are as to when you would tackle any one of these key components. So
Beautiful. Margaret, between G2, Generation 2 and Generation 3, there commonly is like this incredible jump in complexity introduced to the family's planning and protocols. How do you help a family to find the right balance between tax and legal complexity and the family's needs to keep things simple and understandable enough that they can execute and live with the plan?
Yeah, this is a big one. Yeah, and of course, as you move from the sibling set to the cousins consortium, you've not only got more complexity with your tax and legal structures, but you've got obviously greater numbers and more diversity in that third generation. So we talk about this issue of managing complexity in the first section of the book, the family journey section, specifically in milestone 11. Many of you know wonderful Scott Peppett. He's a well-known thought leader in this field and head of his family office. And we reference work that Scott has done, writing that he's done around the importance of the family assessing and measuring their enterprise's level of complexity against the family's capacity to understand and manage it. So if the complexity of the enterprise outstrips the family's learning capital, if you will, their ability to understand it, that can force over reliance and a dependent relationship for the family members on their advisors. And Scott says, the goal is to create competent independence for the family so that the family feels confident about their understanding and their ability to manage all those legal and financial and other structures. So to achieve that, you've got to understand your complexity level. So just start with that. Like learning what the existing legal structures are that hold the assets for owners and beneficiaries, understanding, what's involved with accessing their financial assets, et cetera. So understanding what the level of the complexity, and then assessing the skills that the family has for managing that complexity. And then doing just sort of a classic skills gap analysis. So if there is a gap, you can address it one of two ways. You either can simplify the level of complexity in the enterprise, and that would be a collective decision the family would need to make, or you can raise the level of skills and competency of the family. And one way, Sarah's talked about the learning launchpad and creating a culture of learning. So that's where this really comes into play. And then creating a tailored learning process that allows the family to acquire the necessary skills to manage the complexity. So either way, it's just what it boils down to is making sure that the family's competency is aligned with the level of their enterprise's complexity.
Another tool is in milestone 6 of the enterprise journey, where we give you a sample of a complexity profile that we've built at Fox over the last 20 years that identifies the 44 key metrics that create complexity in a family enterprise. And we give you a visual picture of how you rank against other families who are like you, who are also enterprises. And it again is a discussion tool that a family board can look through and identify where are the long stripes in our profile that are causing us to be more complicated and to create headaches for the family members in terms of management of that complexity. And a sample of that complexity profile is on page 75 in the book itself. And anybody can participate in the Fox complexity profile. It's a questionnaire that puts you in a pool with the other enterprise families that are out there in the world, where you can see how your family sets up against others.
Well, I think it's another question of, how much family involvement how much does the family want to be involved in the investment process? How much do they not want to be? Do they want to be hands off? There's also this assumption that after you sell your family enterprise and you maybe morph into a family office, that all of a sudden your investments should become very complex. And I would just encourage families to not assume that, and to decide, how complex do you want to be? And I was working with one family and basically asked them, what is the purpose for these assets? And if the purpose isn't to just grow them as big as you can, then you have other choices you can make with how you invest, how you give some of those assets away. And so I think the family really needs to be intentional about what is the purpose for the assets, because many times advisors can assume, well, of course they want me to just grow these as big as they can, and to do that we're going to go after these really intricate investments that most of the family members probably will not understand, and that may actually end up alienating the family members from their own family office. And so anyways, it's just a thought that we need to really look at, what is the right level of complexity for the family, and then also how hands-on does the family want to be, specifically with the investment side, because it can take over their whole world. And if they have their own, career paths that they want to pursue, this complexity that we may introduce on the investing side may not actually be helpful to them from an overall perspective.
The other generational dimension of that you find as families evolve is that there is a risk-taking pool of individuals in the family, and there are individuals who are not risk takers, who get very anxious about hanging out on the edge of the plan. And the nature of the portfolio options begins to organize around what the financial goals are for different subsets of the family.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Margaret, one of the observations I've made is the crucial role of the family's, we'll call them chief emotional officer, or the person that typically is most attuned to the non-financial needs of the rising generation. Many times this is the role played by mothers in the family. What are some of the things that advisors can do to make sure that this person gets the attention and has the influence that they should have in the planning process?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yeah. Well, I know you've interviewed Amy Hart Klein and Dennis Jaffe, both here at authors at Drucker. And Amy wrote a great book called Finding Her Voice, and she talks about some of this in there that I think is so rich. Also say that the chief emotional officer doesn't necessarily have to be, female or the matriarch, but so often they are. So I think the first thing advisors can do is to simply recognize how vital and integral this role is in sustaining the family enterprise. I mean, it's just as vital as the chief executive officer role in the family business, arguably. So just, bringing that to awareness and really honoring that, believing that is the first step. Because so often these folks are, and I love giving it a name, chief emotional officer or whatever feels right for the family is a wonderful idea to sort of formalize that role. So then I would say, really making sure that person or those people, there's a group of them, are really involved in setting up the structures that support the family, like, early on the family council or the family assembly, participating in the creation of the, family's educational programs, empowering them to mentor or coach the younger people, but, really finding meaningful ways to give them voice, to honor them, honor the role, and give them real meaningful involvement, I think is really important. And this goes back to what I think you were just saying, Dave, which is, recognizing that it isn't just about the family's, managing the family's financial capital. It's about all of the family's capital. And that chief emotional officer is just crucial to doing that well.
Well, and I'm particularly interested in that group because of the power and the influence that they have, and it's not always publicly seen.
Right.
But if you look at a group that is going to influence how children feel about a family enterprise, about the children's relationship with financial capital, that is the group that's going to influence it. It's probably not the leader of the business, which
Right.
may surprise some people. But if that group gets overlooked, we're really not only alienating them, we're really setting the rising generation up for not having a great context for the family capital, the family enterprise. And so that's my heartfelt plea to anyone on this call is engage them, ask them good questions, allow them to have their fingerprints all over the planning process, because if you do, again, the likelihood of you having an engaged rising generation that is curious about the family enterprise, that does want to learn about how to be in relationship with the financial capital, that wants to participate in family giving, it goes up so much. Whereas, if it's just a process that is where they're not involved, it's likely going to miss a bridge. We're going to miss a bridge. I want to pause real quick. So I don't want to take all the airtime here. I want you to begin, audience, to put your questions in the chat. I'm going to ask another question or two to Sara and Margaret, but I really would love to engage with you. It's not every day you get a chance to interact with Sara and Margaret. So please start to put your questions in the chat, and we'll get to those in just a minute. Sara, I wanted to talk to you. This next one is a big question. Maybe all these questions are really big questions, but milestone 15 of the enterprise journey does a deep dive on how to assess and mitigate enterprise risk. And we should probably dedicate a 2-hour call to this topic of risk. But what are some of the typical risks that a family enterprise faces, and what are some of the strategies to mitigate those risks?
Yes. So this definitely takes a longer period of time, but this topic of risk management, which is so incredibly critical today in this disruptive world we live in, is really linked to the complexity conversation that we were having before. And I believe in this day and age, the ability to formalize a risk committee of individuals who have the tolerance and the skill set to tackle the unforeseen and the unknown in a very short period of time will be critical for all of us as family enterprises. It takes unique individuals who, and I would say really experienced outside advisors to serve on a committee that the family designates. These will be the people when we get the ultimate curveball we were not expecting. These will be the people who will tackle how we will proceed. And what analysis we will do about the particular risk. So at this juncture, as we evolve, I think the focus of the family discussion should be around, do we need an opportunity and risk committee that can have an ongoing conversation every quarter or at least twice a year about what is before us? What are the knowns risks and what are the potential unforeseeable risks that we haven't run into yet? The process that corporate risk managers use to manage these types of topics in a corporation have to be modified to recognize that we have here a family journey in addition to an enterprise journey, and that part of often some of the most critical risks are on the family journey side. The lack of engagement or lack of leadership, the lack of skills needed for the jobs that need to be done. On the enterprise side, how families are dealing with the transitions coming from artificial intelligence and what it's doing to the industry that you operate in, all these things that I don't need to remind you because they're on your mind all the time, I'm sure. But knowing if the family has been educated about a systematic process that we're going to use to deal with these things, and they understand that we are going to be organized and quick acting in dealing with what is going to show up, it's going to provide comfort and dispel the inherent effort to be anxious about what's coming down the pike and where are we. And in every fourth generation family, you've got a subset of young people who see opportunity everywhere and are not experienced enough to understand what the risks could be related to those opportunities. And you have other individuals who have been imprinted with Depression-era risk principles that cannot leave those behind. And the challenge is in creating a process that organizes those factors into the sequence of how we're going to talk about these things, how we're going to make our decisions, who gets to decide. So I would put the effort right now around the process, and that's what we tried to provide as a framework in the book. We started looking at this topic in 2005, and the process hasn't changed that much, but the dimensions that are inside of that process are dramatically different than they were. And I would say even the things we talked about, I just looked at the World Economic Forum's risk map that they do every year. They survey 900 risk managers to identify the global framework for risk, and you can get it on the internet. And what was on the 2024 profile and the 2025 profile are different because we are in very different times moving into this particular next decade, I think. So I think it's a priority.
I love the opportunity to have the 3-journey framework as the overlay to this risk and opportunity conversation as well, because if we spend too much time focusing on just enterprise risk and we don't focus on the individual members and their individual journey towards becoming whoever they want to become, we've missed the mark. And so if we can leverage that 3-journey principle as we talk about risk, and I think if we can spend as much time talking about opportunity as we do identifying risk, then that puts a nice balance to it as well. Because there are things that if we're looking for opportunities, we will see them. And if we're only looking for risks, that will be all that we will see as well. So there's a kind of a training of the mind that we probably need to do to have a healthy balance between looking for risks and also looking for opportunities.
Yeah.
One more question, and then we'll go to the chat for some questions. So again, please feel free to continue to submit your questions in the chat. So Margaret, I want to talk a little bit about the personal journey. Again, I think far too little time is spent on the individual needs and emotions along the way to planning for successful transition of a business from one generation to the next. So as you've observed many family businesses and family offices transition, what are some of the biggest personal challenges that individuals typically face?
Okay, yeah, another big one.
Another softball.
Exactly. Thanks for that, Dave. Well, I guess I'd say in business owning families, a big one is seeing individuals who don't see a role for themselves or don't want a role for themselves within the business, feeling, disenfranchised or lesser than, other members of the family who do work in the business or who are being groomed to work in the business or to govern it. And so, this is where, Sara talked earlier about the evolution from being, business centric to thinking, as a enterprise family and being very family centric is so important, so that people aren't defining themselves just in relationship to the business. And in part 3 of the book, which is all about the personal journey, as you've noted, we do talk about ways to help the family culture do this and the individual to do this. And importantly, we kind of emphasize starting with allowing the individual to explore, who he and or she is, and what their life calling or life aspirations are beyond just the enterprise. Because if it's always just focused on the enterprise, again, people can start to feel like, yeah, I just don't fit in here. I don't see a way for myself to fit in. But so by allowing them to think more expansively about their whole life, and then in a formalized way, help them explore the opportunities for involvement within their family's enterprise beyond, again, just the family business. They can start to make decisions about, what's the level of involvement, engagement that I want in the enterprise? How might that shift and change over my different life stages? And what are some specific roles that I could envision myself wanting to play in this enterprise? And then once you've helped them determine those things, then creating a personal development plan that allows them to, build the roadmap for getting there is so important. And, you can do that. You can do that through chief learning officer if you have one in the family office, or doesn't have to be a CLO, but somebody in the family office can help do that. It can be a family mentor or a non-family mentor or an outside coach, but somehow, providing the encouragement and the resource to help them develop those personal development plans is really important. And then giving folks a mechanism for receiving honest feedback on their progress against that plan is another thing that we really do emphasize in that section of the book. And then I'll just say there's another thing that we don't really talk about this in the book, but that I do see is this managing the birthright versus earned right dynamic in the family business, and that can be addressed through a good solid family employment policy that's actually enforced, so that you're not setting family members up for failure or resentment if they, just come into the the family business really not as prepared as somebody from the outside would be required to be.
Well, and I think that one of the things that there's a heightened level of pressure for in these different life stages. So say you have a rising gen graduating from college and maybe they're not interested in the family business. There may be this pressure that they feel unless we make it clear that they don't need to feel that opting out of the family business is not opting out of the family.
Correct.
And it's also not opting out forever of the family enterprise. So, but unless we communicate those things clearly within our families, likely the rising generation will feel the pressure of, I either have to join the family business or not.
Right.
And it's
And
now
it
or
has to look
never.
like how it's looked in the past. And there has to be, it has to be taken into account that these roles will need to evolve and change as the family grows and moves on along their journey.
Exactly. Sarah, anything you would add to that in terms of observations pertaining to that personal journey?
I think I would just reinforce that keeping the family together in the midst of an enterprise is far more difficult than keeping the business together, or keeping the wealth together.
Yeah,
It is the family journey itself that makes all the difference in the long run.
absolutely. Well, again, I want to turn to the chat. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. I would love to have your voices. I know there's leaders of organizations on this call that have families you're working with, so please feel free to put those in the chat. Henry did ask the question, do you have a formal retreat to focus on the family legacy? Specifically, do you have a formal retreat to focus on the family legacy? Either of you want to take that on, Sarah or
That
Margaret?
or better yet, a workshop where you go
Okay.
away for 2 or 3 days, and you focus on that, maybe with other people with you, and everybody discusses their issues, shares possibilities, and then you sort of come out hopefully with a better sense of what you're trying to accomplish. I have a follow-up challenge which I'd like to share after this, that after you've answered that question, if you have time.
Okay.
So I'll just summarize by saying Margaret and I have done that process you just described in more than 10 countries
Okay.
together over the last 20 years. So
So do
it
you
is
have
literally-
do you put on workshops for people to attend?
We haven't done a multi-family version of this. We do a family retreat format where it's multiple generations who begin with the family's history and the looking backward and seeing in what way it informs the future. And then doing scenario planning around where might we go together as a family? What's our future vision for what we'd like to accomplish as a group? And it's very impactful.
And I would just say, Henry, one of the things is if you do this with multiple families, the likelihood of them sharing things that really matter goes down pretty quickly. I think introducing the concept in a multifamily meeting could be helpful so they know that these services are available. But in terms of people being vulnerable and being willing to show up and say what's really important to them, likely they are not going to do that with multiple families in the room because of their fear of judgment, or they don't know what they can say publicly and can't say publicly. So I think there is a place for it with multiple families to introduce these concepts, but likely the work will be done in a single family setting.
I will tell you, David, we do workshops about the concepts in the book, the Building an Enterprise Family. And we've done 2 of them now. And the last one, we had 8 families, 4 from Latin America, 4 from the US. And they were first generation all the way to 4th generation. And they really helped each other and bonded. It was a surprise to me how valuable they felt it was. We're actually going to have a working committee that continues to meet for that group, where they get together every 6 months and measure their progress for
Fantastic.
each other about what they have undertaken. So it's centered around an action plan. Where are we today? Where do we want to go? How do we plan to get there? And there's a roadmap that each person who comes to the workshop fills out. And often 2 or 3 people from the same family come to the workshop.
Fantastic.
So-
Thank you for your question, Henry.
Thank you.
We always do this. The time just escapes. We are already close to the top of the hour. If there is, one more question, we might be able to sneak it in. But really appreciate that question, Henry. And again, every family is different in terms of their willingness to share. Some families, are excited that they have family members going to these meetings with multiple families, and others, lay awake at night wondering, I hope my rising gen doesn't say something that I don't want them to say at this group meeting. So every family is different in terms of their comfort level with sharing, their comfort level with learning from other families. And so we shouldn't assume that every family is the same, that's for sure.
Amen.
Margaret, any final thoughts for our audience today on just the navigation of these complexities of the journey? Any encouragement, any final encouragement before we turn them off into the world?
Well, I guess our hope with this guidebook is that we'll kind of take the overwhelm out of it a little bit. So, you can you just open it up and read through. As Sarah said, at the beginning of each section, we have a checklist. And that's designed to let you assess, have we started this process, have not started it, or, we're in progress. And just start somewhere. And, you can do bite sizes. But just start as Sarah said, start the conversations. And focus on the family. That's the key.
I love it. Just start. Sara, any parting words?
Yeah, just get the discussion going. I often like to begin with asking the family what the questions are that are on their mind, and inventorying all those questions by type of question, just to have a roadmap of what we need to tackle together. People are genuinely curious about that roadmap. What should we be talking about? And we have one family that Margaret and I worked with in 2014, and every time I see them, they say they had 100 questions on their list. And every time I see them, they say to me, Sara, we're up to question 67 now. And this is their scorecard for we're getting these things figured out. And it helps them acknowledge that they are making progress, because sometimes it's hard to see the progress.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. My encouragement is the same: to get started. If you're an advisor to these family offices or family businesses, family enterprises, be curious about them. Let them own the agenda. And I promise you that whatever your practice is, it will be more successful if you'll let them lead the agenda. Because as we tackle their curiosities, we solve the right problems. So Sara and Margaret, thank you so much for doing the work to put this resource together, but then also sharing your precious time with us today. I really appreciate you joining us on Authors at Drucker.
Yeah, and any feedback, our emails are in the book. We would love to hear back from you about all those milestones that we forgot to put in there. Need to be in the next version. Thank you.
Well, thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody, so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. One
final announcement. Next time on Authors at Drucker, I'll be interviewing Scott Saslow about his book, Building a Sustainable Family Office. which will dovetail nicely with this conversation. That will take place on April 17th at 10 a.m. Pacific. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and make it a great day.
Great.